Sometimes a single moment can shatter everything you thought you knew about yourself. For Navy SEAL Commander Jake Morrison, that moment came not in the heat of battle or during a classified mission, but, in the most unexpected place imaginable, at his younger brother's college graduation ceremony. He was there to watch his family celebrate, to blend into the crowd for once instead of leading men into danger. But, when his eyes met those of a woman sitting 3 rows ahead, and he caught a glimpse of the intricate tattoo on her shoulder, his world tilted on its axis. The tattoo wasn't just ink and artistry. It was a message from his past, one he thought was buried forever. A secret that could destroy his career, endanger his team, and unravel the carefully constructed life he'd built over 15 years of military service. As she turned in, their eyes locked across the crowded auditorium, Jake realized that some ghosts refuse to stay buried, and some truths have a way of finding you when you least expect them. This is the story of how a chance encounter at a graduation ceremony became the catalyst for the most dangerous mission of his life, one that had nothing to do with foreign enemies and everything to do with the battles we fight within ourselves. Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his civilian clothes for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, feeling oddly exposed without his uniform. The crisp May morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers across the university campus, but Jake's mind was elsewhere. After 18 months of classified operations that he couldn't discuss with anyone, including his own family, he was finally home for something that mattered: his younger brother Tommy's graduation from Stanford University. The auditorium was filling rapidly with proud families, chattering students, and faculty members in their formal regalia. Jake scanned the crowd with the automatic vigilance that had kept him alive through countless missions in hostile territories. Even in peacetime, even at a family celebration, the habits of a special operations commander never truly switched off. He spotted his parents near the front, his mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while his father adjusted his tie for the 5th time. Jake smiled despite himself. Some things never changed. His mother, Sarah Morrison, had been crying at family milestones since Jake could remember. His father, retired Marine Colonel Robert Morrison, still couldn't attend any formal event without checking his appearance repeatedly, as if inspecting troops. Jake made his way down the aisle, nodding politely to other families as he squeezed past chairs and congratulated himself on arriving early enough to get a decent seat. Tommy had insisted that his big brother didn't need to make a fuss, but Jake knew better. This was important. After years of missing family dinners, birthdays, and holidays due to deployments and training exercises, he wasn't going to miss this. As he settled into his seat, Jake's attention was caught by movement 3 rows ahead. A woman with dark auburn hair was adjusting her position, and, as she did, the sleeve of her navy blue dress shifted, revealing the edge of an intricate tattoo on her shoulder. Something about the design made Jake's breath catch in his throat. The partial view showed what appeared to be a compass rose intertwined with anchor chains, but there was something else, something familiar that he couldn't quite place from this distance and angle. The woman seemed to sense his attention and turned slightly, offering a profile view that made Jake's heart skip a beat. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and an air of quiet confidence that he recognized but couldn't immediately place. She was beautiful, certainly, but it wasn't her appearance that had his pulse racing. It was the nagging feeling that he knew her from somewhere important, somewhere significant in his past. Before Jake could pursue the thought further, the ceremony began. The academic procession filed in with all the pomp and circumstance that such occasions demanded. Faculty members in their colorful hoods, administrative officials carrying ceremonial maces, and, finally, the graduates themselves, beaming with pride and relief as they took their seats. Jake spotted Tommy immediately in the sea of black caps and gowns. Even seated and partially obscured by the crowd, his younger brother's height made him stand out. Tommy had inherited their father's build, tall and broad-shouldered, but, unlike Jake, who had channeled his physicality into military service, Tommy had focused his energy on computer science and technology innovation. The valedictorian's speech was eloquent and inspiring, touching on themes of perseverance, innovation, and social responsibility. Jake listened with half an ear, his attention repeatedly drawn back to the woman 3 rows ahead. Every time she moved, he caught another glimpse of that tattoo, and each glimpse strengthened his conviction that he'd seen it before. More than seen it, it meant something important. As the ceremony progressed through the presentation of awards and recognition of distinguished faculty, Jake found himself studying the woman's posture and movements. She sat with the straight-backed bearing of someone who had military or law enforcement training, her hands folded in her lap in a way that suggested discipline and self-control. When she applauded for the various speakers, her clapping was measured and precise. These were small details that most people wouldn't notice, but Jake's training had taught him to read body language and behavioral patterns. The woman was accompanied by what appeared to be her parents, an older couple who shared her auburn hair and strong jawline. They were well-dressed and attentive, clearly proud of whatever graduate they were there to support. Jake wondered which of the students was theirs, scanning the sea of graduates for someone who might resemble the family. When the dean began calling names for the presentation of diplomas, Jake refocused his attention on the stage, waiting for Tommy's moment. Each name was announced with the graduate's degree and any special honors, and Jake felt a surge of anticipation as they moved through the alphabet toward the M's. Thomas Robert Morrison, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, magna cum laude, member of Phi Beta Kappa. Jake's chest swelled with pride as he watched his little brother stride across the stage to receive his diploma. The kid had done good, better than good. While Jake had been learning the art of warfare and leadership under extreme pressure, Tommy had been quietly becoming one of the brightest minds in his field. Their paths couldn't have been more different, but Jake respected his brother's achievements enormously. As Tommy shook hands with the dean and posed for the official photograph, Jake noticed the woman 3 rows ahead was applauding enthusiastically. He wondered if she knew Tommy somehow, or if she was simply the type of person who celebrated everyone's achievements. The thought made him smile. In his world, genuine kindness and enthusiasm were rare commodities. The ceremony continued, and Jake settled back to wait for it to conclude. That's when fate decided to intervene in a way that would change everything he thought he knew about his past and his future. The woman stood up to stretch, probably trying to ease the discomfort of sitting in the auditorium's less than ergonomic seating. As she raised her arms above her head, her dress sleeve fell away completely, revealing the full extent of her tattoo. Jake's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The tattoo wasn't just any nautical design. It was a specific, intricate piece that he had seen before, not in person, but in a classified file that had haunted his dreams for over a decade. The compass rose was surrounded by anchor chains, but woven through the design were 3 small stars arranged in a triangle, and, beneath it all, barely visible but unmistakably there, were the letters OP in a stylized font. Operation Poseidon. Jake's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles went white. Operation Poseidon was a classified mission from his early days as a SEAL, a joint operation with international partners that had gone catastrophically wrong. It was the kind of mission that officially never happened, the kind that left no paper trail and few survivors. Jake had been one of only 3 American operatives to make it out alive, and, in the years since, he had tried to forget everything about those 48 hours in Eastern Europe. But someone else had survived. Someone else remembered. And that someone was sitting 3 rows ahead of him, wearing the evidence of that nightmare on her skin like a badge of honor or a memorial to the dead. The woman settled back into her seat, completely unaware that she had just shattered Jake's carefully maintained composure. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to place her in the context of that mission. There had been other operatives, British SAS, German KSK, a small team from an agency that Jake had never been briefed on fully. Most of them had died in the ambush that turned what should have been a routine intelligence-gathering operation into a bloodbath. Jake tried to remember faces from the mission briefings, but the memories were fragmented and deliberately suppressed. The military psychologists had been very clear that some experiences were better forgotten, especially when they involved classified operations and friendly fire incidents that could damage international relations if they ever became public knowledge. But, looking at that tattoo, Jake knew that forgetting was no longer an option. The woman 3 rows ahead wasn't just a random graduation attendee. She was a ghost from his past, a living reminder of the mission that had nearly ended his career before it truly began. And, if she was here, at his brother's graduation, it might not be a coincidence. The paranoid part of Jake's mind, honed by years of dealing with threats both foreign and domestic, began to catalog possibilities. Was she following him? Had she somehow discovered his identity and tracked him here? Was this an elaborate setup for some kind of blackmail or revenge plot? The rational part of his mind tried to counsel patience and observation, but the warrior part was already calculating exit routes and threat assessments. As the graduation ceremony moved toward its conclusion, Jake found himself studying everyone around the mysterious woman. Her supposed parents showed no signs of being anything other than proud family members. They had the relaxed posture and genuine smiles of people who were exactly where they wanted to be, doing exactly what they expected to be doing. If this was an elaborate setup, they were either exceptional actors or genuinely innocent bystanders. The dean began his closing remarks, thanking families for their support and graduates for their dedication to learning. Jake barely heard the words. His entire focus was on the woman 3 rows ahead and the implications of her presence. When she turned slightly to whisper something to the older woman beside her, Jake caught a glimpse of her profile again, and this time the angle triggered a specific memory. It was like a puzzle piece clicking into place. He remembered her now, not clearly, but enough. She had been part of the international team, attached to the operation at the last minute when one of the original operatives was injured in a training accident. Jake remembered thinking at the time that she looked too young, too inexperienced for such a complex mission. He had been wrong about the inexperienced part, as subsequent events had proved. Her call sign had been Raven, a reference to her dark hair and sharp intelligence. She had been the communications specialist for the non-American element of the team, responsible for maintaining contact with various international command structures during the operation. Jake remembered her voice now, calm and professional even as everything went to hell around them. She had helped coordinate the evacuation of wounded operatives while under heavy fire, and Jake was reasonably certain she was one of the people who had made it to the extraction point. But if she had survived, why hadn't he heard about it through official channels? Why wasn't she on any of the survivor lists that Jake had been briefed on during his debriefing? The operation had been compartmentalized to an extreme degree, with different agencies and countries maintaining separate intelligence streams, but Jake would have expected some kind of follow-up contact with fellow survivors. The graduation ceremony concluded with the traditional tossing of caps, and Jake was pulled back to the present moment by the surge of celebration around him. Families were standing, applauding, taking pictures, and beginning the slow process of trying to find their graduates in the chaos of post-ceremony mingling. Jake stood with the rest, applauding automatically while his mind continued to process the implications of his discovery. He watched as the woman, Raven, if his memory was correct, stood and gathered her purse. She hugged the older couple who had been sitting with her, and Jake could see the genuine affection in their interaction. Whatever else was going on, these people cared about each other. That was a complication Jake hadn't anticipated. As the crowd began to file out of the auditorium, Jake faced a critical decision. He could let her disappear back into whatever life she had built since Operation Poseidon, pretending he had never seen her. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice from a career perspective. Classified operations were meant to stay classified, and randomly encountering other survivors at public events was exactly the kind of coincidence that made security officials nervous. Or he could try to approach her, to satisfy his curiosity and, perhaps finally, get some answers about what had really happened during those terrible 48 hours in Eastern Europe. The mission had left gaps in Jake's memory, partly due to the head injury he had sustained during the firefight, and partly due to the psychological trauma of losing so many team members. If Raven had survived and remembered more than he did, she might be able to help him piece together the full picture. But approaching her also carried enormous risks. If she was here by coincidence, contacting her might violate security protocols and put both their careers in jeopardy. If she was here intentionally, it might trigger whatever plan she had set in motion. Either way, Jake would be stepping into unknown territory without backup or official support. As he wrestled with the decision, Jake lost sight of her in the crowd. By the time he had pushed through the mass of people trying to exit the auditorium, she was gone. He stood in the sunlight outside the building, scanning the dispersing crowd, but there was no sign of auburn hair or navy blue dress among the hundreds of people spreading across the campus. "Jake! There you are!" Tommy's voice cut through his distraction, and Jake turned to see his younger brother approaching with diploma in hand and a huge grin on his face. Behind Tommy, their parents were beaming with pride and armed with cameras. "Congratulations, Tommy," Jake said, pulling his brother into a bear hug and forcing himself to focus on the present moment. "I'm proud of you, kid." "Thanks for being here," Tommy replied, squeezing back. "I know it's not easy with your schedule." Jake smiled and ruffled Tommy's hair, a gesture that had annoyed his little brother since childhood but which Tommy now tolerated with good grace. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." As the Morrison family gathered for photographs and congratulations, Jake played his part perfectly. He smiled for pictures, praised Tommy's achievements, and made appropriate conversation with the various friends and faculty members who stopped by to chat. But part of his mind remained focused on the mystery of the woman with the Operation Poseidon tattoo, and the questions that her presence had raised. During a brief lull in the family festivities, Jake excused himself to check his phone. He had several missed calls from his commanding officer, which wasn't unusual but which reminded him that his leave time was limited. In 3 days, he would be back at the base, preparing for his next deployment. Whatever he decided to do about Raven, he would have to do it quickly. He was scrolling through his messages when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Commander Morrison?" Jake turned slowly, his heart rate immediately spiking. The woman with the auburn hair was standing about 10 feet away, having approached him with the silent footsteps of someone who knew how to move without being detected. Up close, she was even more striking than he had realized, with intelligent green eyes and the kind of composed bearing that spoke of extensive training and experience. But it was the uncertainty in her voice that caught Jake's attention. She knew who he was, but she wasn't entirely sure. That suggested she was experiencing the same kind of fragmented memory recovery that had plagued Jake since the mission. It also suggested that their encounter truly was a coincidence rather than a planned ambush. "That depends on who's asking," Jake replied carefully, falling back on the kind of non-committal response that he had been trained to give when approached by unknown individuals in civilian settings. The woman took a step closer, close enough that Jake could see the tattoo clearly now. It was exactly what he had remembered, the compass rose and anchor chains surrounding the 3 stars of Operation Poseidon, with the stylized OP beneath. But now he could also see that there were other elements to the design that he hadn't noticed from a distance. Small symbols and letters worked into the pattern that probably represented fallen team members or specific operational details. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that was part greeting and part test. "I think we might have some mutual friends." Jake looked at her extended hand for a long moment, knowing that shaking it would be the first step down a path that he couldn't predict or control. Mutual friends was tradecraft speak for shared operational experience, and her use of the phrase confirmed that she remembered at least some of what had happened during Operation Poseidon. He reached out and shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested she maintained her physical training. Her skin was warm and her pulse was steady, but he could see the tension around her eyes that mirrored his own nervousness. "Jake Morrison," he replied. "And I think you might be right about those mutual friends." Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly at his acknowledgement, and Jake realized that she had been just as uncertain about approaching him as he had been about approaching her. That mutual vulnerability created an odd sense of connection, as if they were both stepping into dangerous territory, but at least they were doing it together. "I was here for my nephew's graduation," Elena explained, glancing back toward the dispersing crowd. "I wasn't expecting to see anyone from the old neighborhood." The old neighborhood was another piece of tradecraft terminology, confirming that Elena was definitely referring to their shared operational history. Jake found himself impressed by her casual use of professional language, suggesting that she had continued working in intelligence or military fields after Operation Poseidon. "Small world," Jake replied, matching her tone. "I was here for my brother. He just graduated from the computer science program." Elena smiled, and, for the first time since he had spotted her in the auditorium, Jake saw her genuine personality shine through the professional wariness. "Computer science. That's impressive. Very different from the family business." "Sometimes different is good," Jake said, surprised by his own honesty. He hadn't intended to reveal anything personal about his family dynamics, but something about Elena's presence made him want to be authentic rather than simply careful. "It is," Elena agreed. "Though the family business has its own rewards." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them acutely aware that they were having two conversations simultaneously: the surface-level exchange about family and careers, and the deeper discussion about their shared past and what it meant that they had encountered each other again. "Elena! There you are!" An older woman's voice interrupted their conversation, and Jake saw the same woman who had been sitting with Elena during the ceremony approaching with what was clearly her husband. "We've been looking everywhere for you." "Sorry, Mom," Elena replied, her voice shifting to a more casual tone. "I ran into an old colleague." Jake found himself being introduced to Elena's parents, Roberto and Maria Vasquez, who were warm and welcoming in the way that proud family members tend to be at graduation ceremonies. They insisted on taking pictures with Elena and her colleague, and Jake found himself posing for photos while trying to process the surreal nature of the situation. As they chatted about the ceremony and Elena's nephew's achievements, Jake learned that Elena worked as a consultant for various government agencies, specializing in international security issues. It was the kind of vague job description that could cover a multitude of classified activities, but it also suggested that she had successfully transitioned her military or intelligence experience into civilian consulting work. "We should probably get going," Roberto said eventually, checking his watch. "We promised Carlos we'd take him to lunch before he has to pack up his dorm room." Carlos must be the nephew, Jake realized. He watched as Elena hugged her parents goodbye and promised to join them at the restaurant shortly. The interaction was natural and affectionate, providing more evidence that her presence at the graduation was genuinely coincidental rather than part of some elaborate operational setup. After her parents left, Elena turned back to Jake with a more serious expression. "We should talk," she said simply. "There are things about the old neighborhood that I think we both need to understand better." Jake nodded, knowing that she was right. The coincidence of their meeting might be genuine, but the implications of their shared past couldn't be ignored indefinitely. "I agree. But not here." "No, definitely not here," Elena replied, glancing around at the still crowded campus. "Do you have time later today?" Jake checked his watch. His family had plans for a celebration dinner, but that wasn't until evening. "I could meet somewhere this afternoon. Somewhere public but private, if you know what I mean." Elena smiled, recognizing the operational thinking behind his suggestion. "There's a coffee shop downtown called The Grind. It's usually busy enough for background noise but has tables in the back where we can talk without being overheard." "I know the place," Jake said. 3 o'clock? Perfect." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Jake. "That's my cell number, in case plans change." Jake looked at the card briefly before sliding it into his wallet. Elena Vasquez, International Security Consultant. The front of the card was professionally printed with contact information, but the handwriting on the back was distinctly personal, another small sign that she trusted him enough to share private information. "I'll see you at 3, Jake said, extending his hand again. This time when they shook hands, the gesture felt less like a test and more like an agreement between professionals who understood the stakes of their situation. Elena's grip was just as firm as before, but Jake sensed a different kind of energy in the contact, not wariness, but determination. As Elena walked away to rejoin her family, Jake remained standing in the sunlight, processing everything that had just happened. In the span of 15 minutes, his carefully structured post-graduation family day had been transformed into the prelude to a conversation that could potentially alter his understanding of one of the most traumatic experiences of his military career. He rejoined his own family, slipping back into the role of proud big brother and dutiful son while part of his mind continued to analyze the implications of his encounter with Elena. Tommy was describing his post-graduation plans, talking about job interviews and potential career paths, but Jake found himself thinking about different kinds of plans, the kind that involved classified information and unresolved questions from operations that officially never happened. As the Morrison family made their way across campus toward the parking lot, Jake caught himself scanning the crowd one more time, looking for auburn hair and navy blue dress. But Elena was gone, presumably headed to lunch with her family and her nephew Carlos. In a few hours, Jake would learn what she remembered about Operation Poseidon and why she had decided to approach him despite the obvious security risks. The morning had started as a simple family celebration. By afternoon, it would become something much more complex and, potentially dangerous. Jake Morrison, Navy SEAL commander, was about to discover that some missions never truly end, they just go dormant until the right circumstances bring them back to life. Jake arrived at the grind 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained by years of military operations where early arrival meant life and late arrival often meant death. The coffee shop was exactly as Elena had described, busy enough to provide conversational cover but with secluded seating areas where sensitive discussions could take place without attracting unwanted attention. He chose a table in the back corner, positioning himself with clear sight lines to both the front entrance and the rear exit. The chair he selected put his back to the wall, another automatic precaution that had become second nature over his years in special operations. Jake ordered a black coffee and settled in to wait, using the time to observe the other patrons and plan the conversation ahead. The lunch crowd was typical for a college town coffee shop: students with laptops, small business meetings, a few tourists consulting guidebooks and maps. Nothing that set off his internal alarm systems, but Jake remained alert. His encounter with Elena had reminded him that the past had a way of reaching into the present when least expected, and he wasn't about to be caught off guard twice in one day. At exactly 3 o'clock, Elena walked through the front door. She had changed from her graduation ceremony outfit into jeans, boots, and a lightweight jacket that Jake recognized as the kind worn by people who habitually carried concealed weapons. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she moved with the efficient purposefulness of someone who knew how to handle herself in potentially dangerous situations. She spotted Jake immediately and made her way to his table with minimal scanning of the room, another sign of professional training. Elena had clearly done her own advance reconnaissance of the coffee shop, probably arriving early to check for potential problems or surveillance. "Commander," Elena said as she approached, extending her hand in greeting. "It's just Jake here," he replied, standing to shake her hand and gesture toward the chair across from him. "And I'm guessing you prefer Elena to any old call signs." Elena smiled as she sat down, the expression transforming her face and making her appear younger and more approachable. "Elena works fine. Though I have to admit, hearing Raven again after all these years was quite a shock." "So she did remember her operational call sign," Jake noted. That suggested her memories of Operation Poseidon were clearer than his own, which could be either helpful or dangerous depending on what she remembered and why she wanted to discuss it. "Can I get you something?" Jake asked, nodding toward the coffee bar. "Black coffee, no sugar," Elena replied without hesitation. "Just like the old days." Jake made his way to the counter, using the brief separation to collect his thoughts and observe Elena's behavior. She was checking her phone but keeping her attention divided between the device and the room around them. Professional situational awareness, but not the kind of hypervigilance that suggested immediate danger. When he returned with her coffee, Elena had placed her phone face down on the table and was studying Jake with the kind of direct assessment that he associated with intelligence operatives trying to read potential assets or threats. "So," Elena began after taking a sip of her coffee, "Operation Poseidon. What do you remember?" The directness of her question caught Jake off guard, though he realized he should have expected it. Elena wasn't the type of person to waste time with small talk when serious matters needed discussion. Her approach reminded him of the mission briefings they had shared over a decade ago, straight to the point and focused on actionable information. "Fragments," Jake admitted after a moment's consideration. "The mission briefing said we were going in to gather intelligence on weapons trafficking through Eastern European ports. Joint operation with multiple international partners. Things went sideways on day 2. Elena nodded, her expression growing more serious. "That's consistent with what I remember about the official briefing. But, Jake, there was more to it than that. Things that weren't in the standard mission parameters." "Such as?" Elena glanced around the coffee shop, confirming that no one was within earshot of their conversation. When she spoke again, her voice was lower and more intense. "The weapons we were tracking weren't just conventional arms. There was intelligence suggesting nuclear material was being moved through the same networks. The kind of material that could be used for dirty bombs or worse." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Nuclear material changed everything about an operation's risk profile and political implications. It also explained why Operation Poseidon had been classified at such a high level and why there had been so little official follow-up. I don't remember any mention of nuclear material in my briefings, Jake said carefully. Because you weren't briefed on that aspect, Elena replied. The intelligence came through channels that weren't shared with the American side of the operation. My team was specifically tasked with tracking the nuclear component while your team focused on the conventional weapons trafficking. Compartmentalized intelligence, Jake said, understanding the implications immediately. Different agencies, different objectives, same operational space. Exactly. Which is why everything went to hell when we encountered that ambush. Your team was positioned based on intelligence about arms dealers. My team was positioned based on intelligence about nuclear smugglers. Neither of us had the complete picture. Jake leaned back in his chair, processing this revelation. Compartmentalized intelligence was a common feature of complex international operations, but it often led to exactly the kind of confusion and friendly fire incidents that had plagued Operation Poseidon. The ambush, Jake said slowly, it wasn't random, was it? Elena shook her head grimly. We were set up. Someone with access to both intelligence streams fed information to the targets. They knew we were coming, they knew where we would be positioned, and they knew how to hit us in a way that would maximize casualties while making it look like operational incompetence rather than betrayal. The coffee shop suddenly seemed too warm, and Jake found himself scanning the room again, looking for anything that might indicate they were being watched or recorded. The revelation that Operation Poseidon had involved nuclear material and deliberate sabotage elevated their conversation from reminiscence to potential national security issue. Do you have evidence of the setup? Jake asked. Some, Elena replied cautiously. But nothing that would hold up in an official investigation. After the mission went bad, I was debriefed by people who seemed more interested in what I might remember than what actually happened. It took me years to piece together even this much. Same here. My debriefing felt more like damage control than information gathering. They were very focused on making sure I understood the classified nature of the operation and the importance of not discussing details with anyone. Elena nodded knowingly. Standard procedure when an operation involves potential political embarrassment. The nuclear angle made it even more sensitive. If word got out that we had lost track of weapons-grade material because of intelligence failures and possible sabotage, it would have been an international incident. But you kept investigating on your own, Jake observed. Wouldn't you? Elena countered. 12 people died in that ambush. Good people, professional soldiers and intelligence operatives who trusted their leadership to give them accurate information and proper support. They deserved better than a classified burial and a cover story about operational difficulties. Jake understood her motivation completely. The military and intelligence communities were built on trust, trust in leadership, trust in intelligence, trust in the men and women fighting beside you. When that trust was violated, it left wounds that never fully healed. What did you find in your investigation? Jake asked. Elena reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping through several pages before finding what she was looking for. The arms dealer we were tracking, Viktor Kozlov, had connections to intelligence services in at least 3 different countries. He wasn't just a criminal entrepreneur, he was an asset being used by multiple agencies for different purposes. That would explain how he got advance warning of our operation, Jake said. If he was feeding information to intelligence services, he would have had sources inside the agencies planning Operation Poseidon. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Elena leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. Kozlov died in a car accident 6 months after our mission. Very convenient timing, considering he was the only person who could have directly implicated the sources who warned him about our operation. You think he was eliminated? I think someone cleaned up loose ends. Kozlov's death removed the most obvious connection between the failed mission and whoever was responsible for feeding him intelligence. Jake considered the implications of Elena's theory. If Operation Poseidon had been compromised from within, it suggested a level of treachery that went beyond simple intelligence failures. Someone with access to highly classified information had deliberately sabotaged a mission, resulting in multiple deaths and the loss of nuclear material. Elena, Jake said slowly, why are you telling me this now? It's been over a decade since the mission. Why not let sleeping dogs lie? Elena's expression hardened, and Jake saw a flash of the determination that had helped her survive the ambush all those years ago. Because the sleeping dogs aren't staying asleep. 3 months ago, Viktor Kozlov's son contacted me through intermediaries. He has information about his father's activities, including details about Operation Poseidon that were never in any official reports. What kind of details? The location of the nuclear material we lost track of during the mission. And the identity of at least some of the people who were feeding intelligence to his father. Jake felt his pulse quicken. The nuclear material from Operation Poseidon had been written off as lost or destroyed in the chaos of the ambush. If it was still unaccounted for, it represented a significant ongoing threat to national security. Where is Kozlov's son now? Jake asked. That's the problem, Elena replied grimly. He was supposed to meet with me next week, but 3 days ago he disappeared. His apartment was searched, professionally, by people who knew what they were doing. No signs of struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. You think the same people who compromised the original mission are cleaning up loose ends again? I think someone doesn't want the truth about Operation Poseidon to come to light. And, now that you and I have made contact, we might be considered loose ends ourselves. Jake looked around the coffee shop again, this time with heightened awareness of potential threats. The conversation had moved from personal reminiscence to active operational concern, and his training was telling him that they might be in danger. Elena, if what you're suggesting is true, then coming to me was incredibly risky. You've potentially put both of us in the crosshairs of people with the resources and motivation to eliminate threats to their security. I know, Elena replied simply. But I couldn't investigate this alone anymore. I need someone with current operational capabilities and official connections. Someone the bad guys might hesitate to eliminate because it would attract too much attention. And, you think that's me? You're a Navy SEAL commander with an exemplary record and high-level security clearances. Eliminating you would require explanations that the people behind this probably can't provide without exposing themselves. You're also one of the few people who survived Operation Poseidon and might be willing to help me get to the truth. Jake had to admire Elena's strategic thinking, even as he recognized the enormous personal and professional risks involved in what she was proposing. Pursuing an unauthorized investigation into a classified operation could end his military career and potentially land both of them in federal prison. What exactly are you asking me to do? Jake said. Help me find Kozlov's son before the people who took him decide he's too dangerous to keep alive. Help me recover the evidence he claims to have about the original mission. And help me identify the people responsible for sabotaging Operation Poseidon and getting 12 good people killed. Elena's voice carried a weight of conviction that Jake recognized from his own moments of moral clarity. She wasn't asking him to join a vendetta or a conspiracy theory. She was asking him to help complete a mission that should have been completed over a decade ago. But the risks were enormous. Unauthorized investigations into classified operations were career-ending at best and criminal at worst. If Elena was wrong about the conspiracy, or if they were caught pursuing leads without official sanction, Jake could lose everything he had worked for over 15 years of military service. On the other hand, if Elena was right, then nuclear material was still unaccounted for and the people responsible for 12 deaths were still in positions where they could do similar damage again. From a national security perspective, those were risks that might justify bending or breaking regulations. I need to think about this, Jake said finally. What you're proposing isn't just about getting justice for the people who died. It's about pursuing an active investigation that could expose both of us to criminal prosecution if we're caught. I understand, Elena replied. But, Jake, think about the alternative. If we do nothing, the nuclear material stays missing, the people responsible stay in power, and eventually they might compromise another operation. How many more people have to die before someone takes action? Elena's argument was compelling, but Jake's training also included understanding the importance of proper channels and official authorization. Going off on unauthorized missions, no matter how well-intentioned, was exactly the kind of behavior that could undermine the military and intelligence structures he had sworn to protect. "If I were to help you," Jake said carefully, "it would have to be done right. No cowboy operations, no unauthorized surveillance, no breaking federal laws. Everything would have to be defensible if it ever came to light." "Agreed," Elena said immediately. "I'm not looking for vigilante justice. I want the truth, properly documented and officially acknowledged. But I also want it before more people die." Jake checked his watch and realized they had been talking for over an hour. His family would be expecting him for dinner soon, and he needed time to process everything Elena had told him before making any commitments. "I need 48 hours to think this through," Jake said. "This isn't the kind of decision I can make on the spot." Elena nodded, seeming to understand his need for careful consideration. "I'm staying in town for a few more days to spend time with family. You have my number." As they prepared to leave, Elena reached into her jacket again and pulled out a manila envelope. "Jake, there's something else. I brought copies of some of the information I've gathered over the years. Nothing classified, just public records and newspaper articles that support what I've been telling you. If you decide not to help, I understand. But if you decide you need to know more, this will give you a starting point." Jake accepted the envelope, feeling its weight and wondering what revelations it might contain. The physical evidence made Elena's claims feel more real and more serious, but it also represented another step down a path that he might not be able to retrace. "Elena," Jake said as they stood to leave, "assuming I decide to help you, what's the first step? Where would we start looking for Kozlov's son?" "I have some leads on the people who might have taken him," Elena replied. "But following up on those leads will require resources and capabilities that I don't have as a civilian consultant." "The kind of resources and capabilities available to a Navy SEAL commander with official connections?" "Exactly." They walked toward the front of the coffee shop together, both of them automatically scanning for potential surveillance or threats. Jake noticed that Elena checked the street through the front window before exiting, and that she had positioned herself to observe his departure route. "Elena," Jake said as they reached the sidewalk outside, "if we do this, if I decide to help you, we need to establish some ground rules. Communication protocols, operational security, clearly defined objectives. This can't be an emotional crusade. It has to be a professional investigation." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Elena replied. "Jake, I've been working on this alone for too long. Having a partner with your training and connections could make all the difference." They shook hands again, and Jake was struck by how much their relationship had evolved over the course of a single conversation. A few hours ago, Elena had been a mysterious woman at his brother's graduation. Now she was potentially his partner in an investigation that could expose government corruption and recover missing nuclear material. As Elena walked away toward her car, Jake remained on the sidewalk, processing the enormity of what she had proposed. In 48 hours, he would have to decide whether to risk his career and his freedom to pursue the truth about Operation Poseidon. The decision would define not just his immediate future, but his understanding of duty, justice, and the obligations that survived beyond the end of official missions. Jake drove home through the familiar streets of his hometown, the manila envelope on the passenger seat serving as a constant reminder of the choice he faced. By tomorrow night, he would know whether he was ready to become Elena Vasquez's partner in pursuing ghosts from their shared past, or whether some secrets were better left buried. The graduation ceremony that morning had been about celebrating new beginnings and future possibilities. The conversation at the grind had been about confronting unfinished business and unresolved obligations. Jake Morrison, Navy SEAL commander, was about to discover which path would define the next chapter of his life. As he pulled into his parents' driveway, Jake saw Tommy's car already there and lights on in the dining room. His family was waiting to celebrate Tommy's achievement with a special dinner, complete with his mother's famous lasagna and his father's carefully selected wine. It would be a normal evening with people he loved, focused on positive accomplishments and family bonds. But, in his pocket, Jake carried Elena's business card. And, on his passenger seat lay evidence of conspiracy, betrayal, and unaccounted for nuclear material. The contrast between his two realities, loving family man and special operations commander investigating potential government corruption, had never been more stark. In 48 hours, Jake would have to choose which reality would take precedence. The decision would determine not just his own future, but, potentially, the safety and security of countless innocent people whose lives hung in the balance of secrets that some people were willing to kill to protect. The family dinner was everything Jake had hoped it would be: warm, celebratory, and blissfully normal. Tommy regaled them with stories from his final semester. Their mother fussed over everyone's plates, and their father shared carefully measured anecdotes from his own military service. For 3 hours, Jake managed to focus entirely on the present moment, pushing thoughts of Elena and Operation Poseidon to the back of his mind. But, later that night, alone in his childhood bedroom with Elena's envelope spread across the desk, the weight of the decision before him became impossible to ignore. The documents Elena had provided were meticulously organized and thoroughly researched. Public records showing the timeline of Viktor Kozlov's business activities, newspaper clippings about unexplained deaths of people connected to Eastern European arms trafficking, financial records suggesting patterns of money movement that didn't match official explanations of Operation Poseidon's aftermath. None of it was classified information, but, taken together, it painted a picture that supported Elena's theory about betrayal and cover-up. More importantly, it demonstrated that she had been pursuing this investigation with professional thoroughness rather than emotional obsession. Jake spent hours reviewing the materials, cross-referencing names and dates with his own fragmented memories of the mission. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in ways that made his stomach turn. The arms dealer they had been tracking wasn't just a criminal, he was a well-connected asset whose elimination served multiple intelligence agencies' interests. The mission hadn't failed due to bad luck or operational incompetence. It had been sabotaged by people who needed certain information to disappear along with the people who possessed it. Around 3 a.m, Jake's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his commanding officer. The text was brief and seemingly routine, a reminder about upcoming training schedules and deployment preparations. But, buried in the operational language was something that made Jake's blood run cold. Note: recent queries about historical personnel files have been flagged for security review. Recommend caution regarding unauthorized research into classified operations. Someone knew that Elena had been investigating Operation Poseidon. Someone with access to military communications systems had sent Jake an unofficial warning disguised as routine correspondence. The message was clear: he was being watched, and his association with Elena had already been noted by people with the power to end his career. Jake stared at the message for a long time, weighing its implications. The warning could be interpreted as evidence that Elena was right about the cover-up. People with something to hide were monitoring anyone who showed interest in the mission. But it could also be interpreted as evidence that pursuing the investigation would put both of them in serious legal and professional jeopardy. He walked to the window of his childhood bedroom and looked out at the quiet suburban street where he had grown up. Everything about the scene was peaceful and secure, representing the kind of life that his military service was designed to protect. But, somewhere out there, nuclear material remained unaccounted for, and the people responsible for 12 deaths continued to occupy positions of trust and authority. Jake had joined the Navy SEALs because he believed in protecting innocent people from threats they couldn't handle themselves. The question now was whether that mission extended to threats within his own government, and whether he was willing to risk everything he had built to pursue that protection. The next morning brought another complication. Tommy found Jake in the kitchen at dawn, nursing his third cup of coffee and staring at Elena's documents with tired eyes. "Rough night?" Tommy asked, pouring his own coffee and settling into the chair across from his older brother. "Something like that," Jake replied, gathering the papers and sliding them back into the envelope. "Just some work stuff I need to sort through." Tommy studied Jake's face with the kind of analytical intelligence that had made him successful in computer science. "Jake, I've known you my entire life. You don't lose sleep over routine work stuff. What's going on?" Jake considered deflecting the question with humor or distraction, but something about Tommy's direct concern made him reconsider. His younger brother had always been perceptive, and their conversation might actually help Jake clarify his own thinking about the decision he faced. If you discovered that people in authority had done something wrong, Jake said carefully, something that got people killed and might still be putting people at risk, what would you do? Report it to the appropriate authorities, Tommy replied without hesitation. What if the appropriate authorities might be the same people who did the wrong thing in the first place? Tommy was quiet for a moment, recognizing that Jake's question wasn't hypothetical. Then, I'd find different authorities. Higher up the chain, outside agencies, whistleblower protections. There are systems in place for exactly this kind of situation. And, if using those systems would destroy your career and possibly land you in prison? Jake, Tommy said seriously, are you talking about something that actually happened, or something that's happening now? Jake met his brother's eyes, seeing the same moral clarity that had driven Tommy to excel academically despite having no interest in following their father's military path. Tommy had always chosen the harder right over the easier wrong, even when it cost him personally. I'm talking about a choice I have to make in the next 24 hours, Jake said. A choice between staying safe and doing what might be right. Then, you already know what you're going to do, Tommy replied. You're going to do what's right, because that's who you are. The question isn't whether you'll take the risk. The question is how to take it intelligently. Jake smiled despite his exhaustion. His little brother had just summarized his own conclusion more clearly than hours of internal debate had managed. Tommy, if I did decide to pursue something like this, would you be willing to provide some technical support? Nothing illegal, just research and information management that might require specialized computer skills? Tommy leaned back in his chair, understanding the full weight of what Jake was asking. You want me to help you investigate something that could put you in serious trouble. I want you to help me do the right thing in the smartest way possible. What kind of technical support are we talking about? Jake pulled out Elena's business card and showed it to Tommy. This woman is investigating something that happened during one of my deployments. Something that involves missing nuclear material and possibly corrupt intelligence officials. She's been working alone for years, and she needs help from people with current operational capabilities. Tommy studied the card, then looked back at Jake with new understanding. And you're the person with current operational capabilities. Among other things, yes. Jake, this sounds incredibly dangerous. Not just professionally, but physically. If these people are willing to kill to protect their secrets, going after them puts you directly in their crosshairs. I know. But, Tommy, if we don't do something, more people might die. And, the nuclear material Elena is tracking could end up being used against American targets. Tommy was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of what Jake had shared. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same determination that Jake remembered from their childhood arguments about fairness and justice. What do you need me to do? Right now, just be prepared to help with information gathering and communication security. If I decide to move forward with this, Elena and I will need to coordinate without using channels that might be monitored by the people we're investigating. I can set up secure communication protocols and encrypted file sharing. I can also help with research that requires accessing databases or tracking digital footprints. But, Jake, I want your word that you'll be careful. Mom and Dad have already lost enough sleep worrying about your deployments. They don't need to worry about you pursuing unauthorized investigations too. Jake reached across the table and gripped his brother's shoulder. I promise I'll be as careful as possible. And, Tommy, thank you. Having someone I trust watching my back could make all the difference. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of their parents moving around upstairs, beginning their morning routines. Jake gathered Elena's documents and headed for his room, knowing that he needed to make a final decision and contact Elena before his family's normal Sunday activities made private communication impossible. At 10 o'clock, Jake called Elena's number from his secure phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert and professional despite the early hour. Elena, it's Jake. I've made my decision. And I'm in. But we do this my way, with proper operational security and clearly defined objectives. No cowboys, no unauthorized surveillance, no breaking federal laws unless absolutely necessary for immediate safety. Jake could hear the relief in Elena's voice when she responded. "Thank you, Jake. You won't regret this." "I hope not. When can we meet to plan our approach?" "I'm flying back to Washington tonight. My nephew's family celebration wraps up this afternoon. Can you get to DC by Tuesday?" Jake checked his mental calendar. He had 2 days of leave remaining, which would be enough time to at least begin the investigation before he had to return to active duty. "I can be there Tuesday morning. Where do you want to meet?" "There's a hotel in Arlington with conference rooms that can be reserved for private meetings." "The Meridian Court. I'll book a room under my consulting company's name and text you the details." "Elena, before we go any further, I need to know exactly what resources you have available for this investigation." "Contacts, financial support, technical capabilities. If we're going to find Kozlov's son before something happens to him, we need to understand what we're working with." "I have some savings that can cover travel and equipment expenses. I have contacts in several European intelligence agencies who might be willing to share information unofficially. And I have years of research on the people and organizations connected to the original mission." "What about current intelligence on Kozlov's son? When and where was he last seen, who he was in contact with, what kind of evidence he claimed to have?" "All of that is documented and ready to share." "Jake, I know this seems rushed, but I've been preparing for this opportunity for years. If you're willing to help, I can have a comprehensive briefing ready by Tuesday morning." Jake found himself impressed once again by Elena's thoroughness and professionalism. Whatever else she wasn't an amateur seeking vigilante justice. She was a trained operative pursuing a legitimate investigation with proper planning and preparation. "One more question," Jake said. "Have you noticed any surveillance since you contacted me? Anyone following you, checking up on your activities, unusual interest from strangers?" Elena was quiet for a moment before responding. "Nothing definitive, but I've had the feeling of being watched since I left the graduation ceremony yesterday. It could be paranoia, or it could be confirmation that approaching you is the right move. Stay alert and vary your routines. If someone is watching you, we need to know about it before we meet in person again." "Understood. Jake, thank you again for doing this. I know what it's costing you. We haven't even started yet." "Thank me when we're done and nobody's dead or in prison." After ending the call, Jake spent the rest of the morning with his family, trying to act normally while his mind processed operational plans and risk assessments. Tommy caught his eye several times with questioning looks, but both brothers maintained the facade of a normal family Sunday. That afternoon, as Jake prepared for his drive back to base, his father approached him with the kind of serious expression that usually preceded important conversations. "Jake, your mother and I are proud of you. We always have been. But we also worry about the risks you take in your work." "I know, Dad. I'm careful." "I'm sure you are. But, Jake, there's careful in the field, and there's careful in your decision-making. Sometimes the biggest risks come from the missions we choose to accept, not the dangers we face while executing them." Jake looked at his father with new understanding. Robert Morrison was a retired Marine colonel with decades of experience in military intelligence. If anyone understood the nuances of Jake's current situation, it would be him. "Dad, are you trying to tell me something specific?" Robert glanced around to make sure they were alone, then spoke in the low, serious tone he had used for classified discussions during his own military career. "I'm telling you that some battles are worth fighting, and some aren't. The trick is knowing the difference before you commit to a course of action that you can't undo. What if the battle involves protecting innocent people from threats they can't handle themselves? Then, you fight it. But you fight it smart, with proper support and clear objectives. You don't go off on unauthorized missions, no matter how justified they seem." Jake realized that his father was offering guidance that went beyond general fatherly advice. Robert Morrison had spent his career navigating the complex intersection of military duty and political reality. His counsel was based on hard-won experience with the kinds of decisions Jake was facing. "Dad, if you were in my position, what would you do?" Robert studied his son's face for a long moment before responding. "I'd make sure I had at least one person in official authority who knew what I was doing and why. Someone who could provide air cover if things went sideways. Going completely dark is rarely the right answer, even when the official channels seem compromised." Jake nodded, filing his father's advice away for future consideration. The suggestion about maintaining some kind of official connection was smart, but it also meant finding someone in authority who could be trusted with sensitive information about potential government corruption. As Jake loaded his gear into his car and prepared to drive back to base, he felt the weight of the decision he had made settling onto his shoulders. In less than 48 hours, he would be in Washington, D.C., meeting with Elena to plan an investigation that could expose high-level corruption or destroy both their careers. But, as he hugged his parents goodbye and shook Tommy's hand, Jake also felt a sense of clarity about his choice. Elena was right, 12 people had died because someone had betrayed Operation Poseidon, and nuclear material remained unaccounted for because of deliberate sabotage. Those facts created an obligation that transcended normal risk calculations. The drive back to base gave Jake time to think through operational details and potential problems. By the time he arrived at his quarters, he had developed the outline of a plan that incorporated his father's advice about maintaining official connections while pursuing Elena's investigation. He would help Elena find Kozlov's son and recover the evidence about Operation Poseidon. But he would also document everything they discovered and ensure that the information reached appropriate authorities through channels that couldn't be easily suppressed or discredited. It wasn't a perfect plan, and it still carried enormous personal and professional risks. But it was a plan that balanced his obligation to pursue the truth with his responsibility to act within legal and ethical boundaries. Monday morning brought final preparations and the beginning of a journey that would take Jake far from the familiar routines of military service into the uncertain territory of investigating his own government. By Tuesday, he would know whether Elena's theory about Operation Poseidon was correct, and whether they could find Kozlov's son before the people responsible for the original cover-up decided to eliminate another loose end. Jake Morrison, Navy SEAL commander, was about to discover that the most dangerous missions sometimes took place not in foreign countries against enemy combatants, but at home against people who had sworn the same oaths of service and protection that he lived by. The Meridian Court Hotel in Arlington was exactly the kind of establishment that catered to government contractors and intelligence personnel, professional, discreet, and equipped with conference rooms designed for sensitive discussions. Jake arrived Tuesday morning to find Elena already waiting in the lobby, dressed in the conservative business attire of a security consultant and reading a newspaper with the casual alertness of someone trained in counter-surveillance. She looked up as he approached, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement before leading him to the elevators without unnecessary conversation. The professional distance was appropriate for a public setting, but Jake could see the tension around her eyes that suggested she had been running on nervous energy since their last meeting. The conference room Elena had reserved was small but well-appointed, with a round table, whiteboards, and no windows, perfect for the kind of sensitive discussion they needed to have. She had already set up her materials, maps, photographs, timeline charts, and several thick folders of documentation. "Coffee?" Elena asked, gesturing toward a carafe and cups on the side table. "Thanks," Jake replied, pouring himself a cup while Elena locked the door and activated a white noise generator that she pulled from her briefcase. "You've been busy." "I had a lot to organize." 3 years of investigation don't summarize themselves. Elena settled into a chair across from Jake and opened the largest of her folders. "Before we discuss Kozlov's son, I need to show you what I've learned about the people responsible for compromising Operation Poseidon." Elena spread a collection of photographs across the table, each showing a different individual in various settings: official portraits, surveillance shots, public event photos. Jake recognized some of the faces from his own government service, but others were unfamiliar. "These are the players," Elena said, pointing to each photograph in turn. "Current and former intelligence officials, defense contractors, and political appointees who had access to Operation Poseidon intelligence and opportunity to compromise the mission. Jake studied the photographs, noting the mix of American and European faces. You've identified specific individuals? I've identified people with means, motive, and opportunity. Proving which ones were actually involved will require more evidence than I can gather alone. Elena pointed to a photograph of a distinguished man in his 60s wearing a Navy uniform with Admiral's insignia. This one particularly concerns me. Jake recognized the face immediately. Admiral William Reeves, current Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and a man whose career had been built on successful special operations and intelligence gathering. If Elena was right about Reeves being involved in the Operation Poseidon cover-up, it explained why investigating the mission had been so difficult and dangerous. That's a serious accusation, Jake said carefully. Admiral Reeves has been involved in some of the most sensitive operations of the past 20 years. Which is exactly why he would have had access to the intelligence that was used to compromise our mission, Elena replied. Jake, I know how this sounds. But, look at the pattern. Elena pulled out a timeline chart showing key events before, during, and after Operation Poseidon. Red lines connected various incidents, personnel transfers, early retirements, convenient deaths, and policy changes that all seemed designed to eliminate people and evidence connected to the failed mission. Reeves was involved in post-mission damage assessment and personnel reassignments, Elena continued. He had the authority to classify documents, transfer personnel to new assignments, and control the flow of information about what had really happened during the operation. Jake studied the timeline, looking for flaws in Elena's logic but finding her conclusions disturbingly plausible. If someone with Admiral Reeves' authority and access had wanted to cover up the true circumstances of Operation Poseidon, he would have had the resources to do it effectively. Elena, even if you're right about this, going after someone like Admiral Reeves requires ironclad evidence and official backing. We can't just present theories and expect anyone to take action against a flag officer. I know. That's why we need to find Kozlov's son and get the evidence he claims to have. Without that proof, everything I've shown you is just speculation and circumstantial connections. Elena opened another folder and pulled out surveillance photographs of a young man in his late 20s, lean build, dark hair, sharp features that resembled his infamous father. This is Dmitry Kozlov. He's been living in Prague under an assumed identity for the past 5 years, working as a freelance translator and staying well clear of his father's old business associates. What changed? Why did he decide to contact you now? His mother is dying. Cancer. Before she passes, she wants her son to clear the family name by exposing the truth about his father's activities. Dmitry inherited his father's private papers, including detailed records of intelligence transactions and the names of people who were paying for information. Jake looked at the photographs of Dmitry Kozlov, trying to imagine what it would be like to grow up as the son of an international arms dealer and double agent. The young man's expression showed intelligence and wariness in equal measure, someone who understood that his heritage made him valuable and dangerous to multiple parties. You said he disappeared 3 days ago. What were the circumstances? Elena pulled out another set of photographs, these showing a modern apartment building in what appeared to be a European city. Dmitry was living in a flat in Prague's Old Town. When he failed to show up for his regular meeting with his mother's doctor, the building superintendent checked his apartment. Everything was gone: clothes, personal papers, computer equipment. But there were no signs of struggle and no indication that he left voluntarily. Professional extraction, Jake concluded. Someone with resources and training took him quietly, probably while he was away from his apartment. That's my assessment. But the question is whether they took him for interrogation or elimination. If they just wanted him dead, there would have been no reason to clean out his apartment so thoroughly. Jake studied the photographs again, noting details about the building's security and access points. Who else knew that Dmitry was planning to contact you? That's what worries me, Elena replied. The communication was arranged through intermediaries, but someone clearly intercepted the information and acted on it. Which suggests that the same network responsible for the original Operation Poseidon cover-up is still active and monitoring for threats. Or that one of your intermediaries isn't as trustworthy as you thought. Elena nodded grimly. I've considered that possibility. But, Jake, regardless of how they found out about Dmitri, the fact remains that he has evidence we need, and he's now in the hands of people who want that evidence suppressed. Jake leaned back in his chair, processing the implications of what Elena had shared. Finding Dmitry Kozlov would require resources and capabilities that went well beyond what a civilian consultant could access, even one with Elena's background and connections. Elena, if we're going to pursue this, I need you to understand something. Finding Dmitry will likely require bending or breaking several federal laws. Unauthorized surveillance, accessing classified databases, possibly conducting operations on foreign soil without official sanction. Are you prepared for those consequences? I've been prepared for those consequences since the day I decided to investigate Operation Poseidon, Elena replied without hesitation. The question is whether you are. Jake considered Elena's question seriously. His entire military career had been built on following orders, respecting chain of command, and working within established systems. What Elena was proposing represented a fundamental departure from those principles, justified only by the possibility that the established systems themselves had been corrupted. I'm prepared to take calculated risks in pursuit of legitimate objectives, Jake said finally. But, I'm not prepared to go completely rogue. If we do this, we maintain some connection to official authority, even if we can't trust the entire system. What did you have in mind? Jake pulled out his own folder, containing documents he had prepared during his drive from the base. I've identified 3 people in government who might be willing to provide unofficial support for an investigation into Operation Poseidon. People with the authority to provide air cover if we get into legal trouble, but who weren't in positions to be involved in the original cover-up. Elena looked through Jake's list, recognizing some of the names. These are all current officials. How do you know they can be trusted? I don't, completely. But they all have records of integrity and they all have reasons to want the truth about Operation Poseidon exposed. Corruption in the intelligence community reflects badly on everyone, and missing nuclear material is a threat to national security regardless of political considerations. Jake, if we bring in official oversight, even unofficially, we lose control of the investigation. These people will have their own agendas and their own political considerations. But we also gain legal protection and operational support. Elena, what you're proposing is essentially a 2-person investigation into high-level government corruption and international nuclear smuggling. We need help. Elena was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with the decision to expand their circle of trust. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of years of working alone on a dangerous investigation. There's something else you need to know. Something I didn't tell you at the coffee shop because I wasn't sure I could trust you completely. Jake felt a chill of apprehension. If Elena had been holding back critical information during their initial conversation, it suggested that the situation was even more complex and dangerous than he had realized. 3 weeks ago, Elena continued, I received a message through the same intermediaries who arranged Dmitry's contact. Someone claiming to have information about current operations that are using the same compromised networks responsible for Operation Poseidon. Current operations? According to the source, there are ongoing intelligence activities that involve the same people who sabotaged our mission. Arms trafficking, nuclear material smuggling, possibly assassination and sabotage operations against American targets. Jake sat forward in his chair, understanding immediately why Elena had been reluctant to share this information. If there were current operations using compromised networks, it meant that the threat wasn't historical, it was ongoing and immediate. Elena, if what you're saying is true, this isn't just about getting justice for 12 dead operatives. This is about preventing future attacks on American interests. Exactly. Which is why I can't wait for official investigations and bureaucratic processes. Every day we delay, more operations could be compromised and more people could die. Who is this source? How do you know the information is reliable? Elena hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with revealing sensitive details. The source claims to be a current intelligence operative who has discovered the ongoing activities and wants to expose them without destroying his own career. He's been feeding information to Dmitry Kozlov as insurance against retaliation. And now Dmitry has disappeared, along with whatever evidence this source provided. Right. Which means our window for acting on this intelligence is closing rapidly. If the people responsible for the cover-up realize how much their source has revealed, they'll move to eliminate all traces of their activities. Jake stood and walked to the whiteboard, beginning to sketch out a rough operational timeline. The scope of what Elena was describing went far beyond personal justice or historical accountability. They were potentially dealing with an active espionage and terrorism threat that required immediate action. Elena, if we're going to pursue this, we need to move fast and we need to move smart. Finding Dmitry becomes our immediate priority, but we also need to identify and protect the current source who's been providing information. Agreed. But, Jake, that means going to Prague and conducting what amounts to a rescue operation in a foreign country without official authorization. Not necessarily. Prague is NATO territory, and there are official channels for requesting assistance from Czech intelligence services. If we approach this correctly, we can get local support without revealing the full scope of our investigation. Elena looked at Jake with new respect. You're thinking like an operational commander rather than someone pursuing a personal investigation. Because that's what this has become. Elena, what you've described isn't just about Operation Poseidon anymore. It's about an active threat to national security that requires operational response. Jake returned to his seat and pulled out his secure phone. I'm going to make some calls to the people on my list. Unofficial contacts, feeling out their willingness to provide support for a sensitive investigation. If I can get at least one person in authority to provide air cover, we move forward with plans to go to Prague. And if you can't? Jake met Elena's eyes, seeing the same determination that had carried her through years of dangerous investigation. Then, we go anyway, but with a lot more risk and a lot less backup. Elena smiled for the first time since their meeting had begun. Jake, I think this partnership is going to work out well. Over the next 4 hours, Jake and Elena developed a detailed operational plan for traveling to Prague, locating Dmitry Kozlov, and extracting both him and whatever evidence he possessed. The plan required careful coordination, significant financial resources, and a degree of risk that made Jake's previous special operations missions seem routine by comparison. But, by late afternoon, Jake had secured unofficial support from one of the officials on his list, a deputy director at the CIA who remembered Operation Poseidon and had his own suspicions about the circumstances of its failure. The support came with significant limitations and deniability clauses, but it provided enough official connection to justify the risks they were taking. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Elena gathered her materials while Jake made final arrangements for travel and equipment. The investigation that had begun with a chance encounter at a graduation ceremony was now becoming an international operation with implications for national security. Elena, Jake said as they prepared to part ways, are you ready for this? Once we get on that plane to Prague, there's no turning back. We'll be committed to seeing this through to the end.